You know, every investor eventually faces a crisis, but what separates the good from the great is how they handle the heat. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on 1974, one of Warren Buffett's absolute toughest years at Berkshire Hathaway, and pull apart the playbook he built right in the middle of the storm. This isn't just about survival, it's about turning misery into a masterclass.
I mean, look at this. Right out of the gate, no corporate jargon, no sugarcoating. The very first sentence of his 1974 letter to shareholders is this brutally honest admission. He just comes right out and says it. That one line tells you everything you need to know about the pressure they were under, and, as we're about to see, the clarity it created. So what does unsatisfactory actually look like in numbers? Here it is, a 10.3% return on equity. Now you might look at that and think, hey, I've had worse years. But for Berkshire at that time, this was a massive red flag. It was their lowest return in years, and it was a clear signal that the alarm bells were ringing. Something was seriously wrong inside the business.
Okay, so where was the fire? What exactly went so wrong? Well, this is where it gets really interesting because the letter shows that the poor results weren't across the board. It wasn't like the whole company was falling apart. In fact, Berkshire's textile and banking businesses, they were doing just fine. The entire problem was concentrated in one specific and very large part of the operation.
And there it is, the whole crisis. Every bit of it can be traced right back to their insurance underwriting business. And this wasn't some minor hiccup, you know? This was a fundamental systemic breakdown in the market dynamics of their biggest and most important business. The engine room was on fire.
So, the really crucial question is why? Why did the insurance industry go so wrong? This is where Buffett the investor becomes Buffett the diagnostician. He didn't just complain about bad results. He dissected the root causes with surgical precision. So let's get into the anatomy of this crisis he laid out.
He boils it down to this toxic combination of three things. First, you've got rampant inflation just sending costs to the moon. Second, and this is a classic Buffettism, unintelligent competition. You know the type, chasing market share at any cost. And third, this really insidious systemic problem of under-reserving. Basically, his competitors were lying to themselves about the real costs. And this slide just lays out the central problem perfectly. It's a classic profit squeeze. Imagine this, your costs for things like auto repairs, medical bills, they're jumping up 1% every single month. But the prices you can charge your customers, the premiums, they're stuck, flat. It is an absolute recipe for disaster. Your profit margins are just getting vaporized.
And this quote right here, it gets to the heart of that under-reserving problem. It's so critical to understand this. His competitors simply weren't setting aside enough money to pay for the future claims they knew were coming. So what happens? They're operating with, as he puts it, faulty information. They were pricing their product based on a fantasy which only made a terrible situation worse.
So you put it all together, right? Costs are exploding, competitors are pricing like maniacs, and everybody is using bad math. The result was a market that was just fundamentally completely broken. You had companies literally selling their product for less than it cost to make it, and the crazy part is many of them didn't even know they were doing it.
But here's what separates the legends from everybody else. It would have been so easy for Buffett to just blame the market, to point fingers and say, hey, it wasn't our fault, but he doesn't. In a true masterclass of accountability, he turns the spotlight right back around on Berkshire itself.
So on top of this massive industry storm, Berkshire actually made things worse. They made their own unforced error. They tried to expand one of their insurance companies into the Florida market, and, well, it was a complete and utter disaster. We're talking a loss of over $2 million.
And this quote, this is what radical ownership sounds like. He's saying, we can't blame the bad weather for our own leaky roof. Despite the terrible market, he refuses to use it as an excuse. This wasn't a market problem, this was a Berkshire problem. He's taking it right on the chin.
And here's the why. The brutal, honest truth. They failed because they strayed outside their circle of competence. They just didn't have the specialized knowledge they needed for that specific market. For any of us as investors, this is just, it's everything. That intellectual honesty to admit when you've made a mistake and don't have an edge. It's incredibly powerful.
So, you're facing an external crisis, and you've just admitted to a major internal mistake. What do? Panic? No! This is where we get the playbook. Instead of panicking, Buffett laid out this clear, counter-cyclical strategy that wasn't about surviving. It was about getting ready to thrive when the storm passed.
This quote really reveals the critical mindset shift. The focus was no longer on clinging to market share or chasing growth. The only thing that mattered was building a war chest. The goal was to hoard cash and financial strength, preparing to go on offense the moment rationality returned to the market. And here's that playbook broken down. It's so beautifully simple. First, just say no. Refuse to write business that's unprofitable. Second, maintain pricing discipline, even if it means losing customers. Third, use that discipline to build up your cash reserves. And fourth, and this is the hardest part, you wait. You patiently wait for the competition to burn itself out.
Now this is the painful part. This is where the rubber meets the road. Following this strategy meant they had to sit there and watch their business volume shrink. A lot. They willingly let competitors grab customers because those competitors were buying business at prices that Buffett called totally unrealistic. It's the ultimate act of choosing long-term health over short-term gratification.
All right, so that was all the way back in 1974. Why does a nearly 50-year-old story matter to us today? Because these principles, they're not some historical artifact. They are a timeless, living framework for how to navigate pretty much any market downturn you're ever going to face.
So let's just boil it all down to the core principles. Number 1, price discipline will always trump growth at any cost. Number 2, intellectual honesty isn't a soft skill, it's non-negotiable. Admit your mistakes and know your limits. 3, patience isn't passive, it's an active, strategic weapon. And finally, number 4, you use downturns to prepare your next offense, not just to play defense.
And that really leaves us with one big question to think about. The next time your industry or your portfolio faces a downturn, and it will, it's natural to just focus on survival, to just play defense. But the lesson from 1974 is crystal clear. The greatest opportunities are forged in chaos, but only for those who spend the crisis preparing their offense.